I u ovoj sesiji posljednjih naš govor.
Our last speaker is Mr. Terence, PIKE, the UNHCR representative in Croatia. You have the floor, sir.
I have, unfortunately, the most difficult part. That's to keep you all awake, as I'm sure you are anticipating your lunch. But please bear with me. This is food for thought. So I'm going to talk to you about the Zagreb Declaration. And I want to first start by welcoming all of you here today. On behalf of UNHCR, I'd like to extend my warm thanks and appreciation to the Deputy Prime Minister and National Coordinator for the Decade of Roma Inclusion 2005-2015, Mr. Neven Mimica, to the Director of the Office for Human Rights and Rights of National Minorities, Mr. Branko Suchanac, to Roma representatives in the Croatian Sabor, Mr. Veliko Kajtazi, and to all participants hereby attending, representing the 12 countries in the Decade of Roma Inclusion, as well as observer countries, representatives of international organizations and NGOs. I would also like to extend an especially warm greeting to representatives of the Roma minority hereby present. We have had the opportunity over the past day and a half of this 23rd International Steering Committee to be introduced to the vast scope of work being carried out in the decade. Carried out in the decade, priority areas including education, employment, healthcare and housing, as well as core issues of poverty, discrimination and gender mainstreaming. We have also been introduced to the impressive agenda which has been set by the Croatian presidency, as part of which we are here today in the first in a series of events which aim not only to achieve the goals of the decade, but also bring its promotion closer to the EU framework. Moreover, this presidency will prove crucial as we approach the conclusion of the decade in shaping its future, deciding on future action, and taking stock of work already done. It is all the more timely given the handover from Croatia to Montenegro next June will be on the eve of the host country's accession to the EU, which will mark the dawn of a new and prosperous future for Croatia and all the national minorities. During the consultative process, the Office of Human Rights and Rights of National Minorities held a number of inclusive and participatory meetings and public awareness discussions where the Roma community, in line with the decade motto, "Nothing about us without us," which places emphasis on Roma participation, will make or break the decade. Were invited to propose topics for the presidency agenda. Moreover, other stakeholders, including UNHCR, all were given the chance to suggest current and pertinent issues. One recurrent theme of these discussions was that of status and citizenship, civil registration and documentation, to which many members of the Roma community in Croatia and in all decade countries at times face obstacles in order to regularize. Challenges are also faced by governments who encourage effective self-identification of these problems in order to establish effective procedures for registration. We also discussed the long-term goal of reduction and elimination of statelessness. UNHCR has been given a mandate to work with governments to prevent statelessness from occurring, to resolve those cases that do occur, and to protect the right of stateless persons. Croatia's recent accession to the 1961 Convention was welcomed by UNHCR as a further expression of Croatia's commitment to ensure that all persons have the right to an effective nationality. I also note the commitment of many countries here present that have also recently ratified and acceded to this important international document, which provides for acquisition of nationality for those who would otherwise be stateless and who have an appropriate link with a state through birth or descent. The lack of an effective citizenship leaves people vulnerable and unable to access or realize some of the most basic human rights, which is why it is our duty to protect them. The UN Refugee Agency has also been tasked explicitly to promote the accession of the two statelessness conventions worldwide, and I would strongly urge decade countries that have not yet ratified or acceded to these conventions to do so. Another important milestone was seen in the adoption of the Zagreb Declaration on 27 October 2011. I believe all of you have a copy in front of you. At the conference on provision of civil documentation and registration in Southeast Europe, which aims inter alia at removing all obstacles to the documentation and registration needs, particularly of vulnerable persons. The conference was organized to highlight present issues related to civil registration and statelessness within Southeastern Europe, in particularly as they affect minorities in the region. Stock was taken of efforts made by states, international organizations, and civil society to address the problems identified. Much information and conclusions were drawn from the 5 2011 Roma inclusion workshops organized and chaired by the European Commission and other activities. Special attention was also paid to the decade of Roma inclusion under the then Macedonian chairmanship. The event aimed to reach an agreement among the states represented on a regional practical mechanism to bring several country-level processes to an effective solution. The conference was hosted by a warm Croatian host and as an interagency initiative was jointly organized by UNHCR, the European Commission, and OSCE, High Commissioner for National Minorities. Held just under a year ago, it gathered together government representatives of Bosnia and Herzegovina, Croatia, Serbia, Montenegro, former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, as well as Kosovo. A wide range of international stakeholders and experts also attended the meeting. During the 2 days of discussion, it became clear that participants, many of whom came from countries who share a common history, were keen to set the agenda for a way forward in order to mutually benefit from examples of good practices and regular exchanges in the matter of civil registration and documentation. Statelessness and situations of persons being at risk of statelessness are an issue for Europe. By not taking adequate measures to provide personal documents to all, states take the risk of marginalizing some communities living on their own territory. Such a situation may in turn prompt these communities to move to other parts of Europe in search of a better life. The declaration sets objectives for progress in reducing statelessness by increasing documentation at the national level, by reducing obstacles to documentation for vulnerable groups, establishing national coordination mechanisms, strengthening services and identification, and increasing awareness while promoting regional cooperation. The principles were reached based on the underlying fundamental human rights obligations and relevant international instruments on statelessness, as well as aspirations towards European integration of the countries present. As you may well see from the copy of the declaration you have received, although the individual goals may seem ambitious, we do believe that through enhanced regional cooperation we can achieve its implementation more widely. Indeed, we see here through the decade the benefits cooperation and exchange can provide. Progress in achieving the objectives may be noted from many of the countries here present. For example, Croatia in the National Strategy for Roma Inclusion 2020 expressly refers to the principles of the Zagreb Declaration. The strategy was drafted over the past year following consultations with a broad range of stakeholders through working groups of experts, including from civil society and the international community, as well as taking into account a wide range of policies, including the EU framework for national Roma integration strategies up to 2020. The strategy was presented to the public at 4 public discussions and was opened for comments and includes a section on status, non-discrimination, and legal aid issues. The principal goal under the resolution of status issues aims for 100% regulated status in accordance with the legal framework by 2020. That may seem ambitious, but if we look at the ways and concrete actions in which this can be achieved, I do believe that Croatia is set to achieve this target. As a key element in resolving status issues, identification and assistance, UNHCR in recent years has implemented regional and country projects here to increase documentation. One of the examples of good practices was the use of mobile teams reaching out to the communities. Another example is the regional NGO cooperation through the medium of WebLAN, which is the Western Balkans Legal Aid Network, which mainly focuses on cross-border activities related to civil registration and documentation. The network envisages a broader scope of cooperation in the future related to the reduction and prevention of statelessness, social inclusion, and raising awareness. As part of UNHCR's support to the decade, I may inform you that we are planning, along with our colleagues from UNDP and UNICEF, to release a report based on quantitative and qualitative data gathered as part of our work in Croatia. The purpose of the report is to provide a comprehensive overview of socio-economic and legal issues affecting the Roma minority. The report will be drafted in the last quarter of this year with a view for publication and launch in spring of 2013 during the Croatian presidency of the Decade of Roma Inclusion, and will be, I believe, very much complementary to the Decade presidency and its goals. Our three agencies will focus on our different areas of expertise in the report, including civil registration and documentation issues, which is an area which UNHCR has gathered much expertise through our experience providing free legal aid to Roma in different parts of the country since 2009. We will introduce new data from various regional and country-specific surveys, and also, where possible, compare results with previous research, which will provide a good basis for an assessment of progress which has been made in many areas in recent years. Moreover, much of the data will be useful as indicators in the context of the future action plan for the National Strategy for Roma Inclusion 2020. We believe it will offer recommendations for future steps to be taken, which can help at both national level and in shaping the future of the decade. We all strongly believe that all Roma should have access to civil registration and documentation, and that the marginalization which they face must end. As we now come to the close of the 23rd Steering Committee and almost reach the anniversary of this declaration, I would like to congratulate all countries who have committed themselves to achieving the principles set out in the declaration, as well as urge governments to work together in order to achieve its common goals. I would like to reaffirm UNHCR's intention to closely work with the Decade of Roma Inclusion, 2005 to 2015, and the Croatian presidency in achieving more definite regional cooperation regarding civil registration and documentation. Thank you for your attention. I believe it is now appropriate to do something which we are all looking forward to. Over to you, Mr. Chairman.